Well, good morning. Yes, it's morning. You can see the wonderful sun behind me there. As a matter of fact, I am not at home in Jacksonville. Nope, I'm on the road doing a wedding here in Slidell, Louisiana, for some really dear friends of mine, the Smiths. I know it's a common name, right? But we grew up with Chris and Mary's family. At least my kids did when we moved to Jacksonville, Florida in 1996. And we all homeschooled together, and our kids grew up together. And, every couple needs couple friends. Well, Chris and Mary are couple friends to Luell and I love them very, very dear. Their kids are very, very dear. And their son, Tim, we're celebrating his marriage. And of course, the middle daughter, who's my daughter's age. Tim Smith is my son Trey Marks' age. Their daughter, Becky, now Dr. Becky Smith, is my daughter Madison's age. And then they have a younger daughter who's actually an adult now. She's a teacher. She is Rachel. And so anyhow, I am here to now talk about forgiveness. Hello, Christy Marie. How are you doing? Hope all things are well. And I hope that you're having a wonderful day and a blessing of a day, and that your day is meaningful for you. So what we're going to do now is talk about forgiveness. What is forgiveness and what is it not? And by the way, while I'm doing this Facebook Live, if you like, feel free to, say hey like Christy did, ask questions. I'll respond the best that I can. But let me know you're here, and let's talk for a little bit. We'll be going about 30 minutes on this Facebook Live. I'll be hanging up, and I'll come back and do another 30 minutes on another topic, okay? And so be watching for that at about 10 o'clock. Yeah, we're headed down to New Orleans today in a little bit. All the families together. We're going to some place called DAT, D-A-T. Like, what is that? DAT dog. Apparently it's a New Orleans staple around here. And then we're going to Cafe Du Monde. So if you've been to New Orleans, you've heard of that, I'm sure. I've never been, even though all the times I've been here. And apparently they have really, really good. Can we upload the videos that are available if we missed the live feed? You know what? I'd have to figure out, Christy, how to yeah, well, you know what? Christy, I do, because I saved them to my Facebook page, Dr. Rick Marks. So they will be there, okay? They will be there, and so you can check them out at the Dr. Rick Marks Facebook page, not necessarily my private personal page, but the Dr. Rick Marks page. So you can find it there for sure, because I tend to save all these and then put them on my the news feed there. All right. We are going to talk about forgiveness. What is forgiveness? What is it not? I want to give you a definition of forgiveness. And then we're going to talk about why forgiveness is so powerful and really a profound act of self-care. You heard me. It's a profound act of self-care. Now, here's the definition that we use for forgiveness, all right? That forgiveness is a choice. It is not, hang on a second. Are you needing me? Sorry about that, folks. My wife kept waving at me. I thought maybe something was wrong. So we'll just start over here. So I see Kurt just, hey, I'm not in Wisconsin yet, buddy. All right. I'm not in Wisconsin yet, but I will be. Actually, I'm in New Orleans, Kurt. And so you should come over here in New Orleans. I was thinking about you last night as I'm watching people, talk about catching alligators. That's right up your alley, Mr. Kurt Williams. Catching all alligators. All right. So we're going to kind of get back to our topic now. All right. We're going to talk about forgiveness and why forgiveness is really a profound act of self-care. All right. Religions talk about you love God and your neighbor as you love yourself. All right. Most healthy religions talk about forgiveness. Hindu, Buddhist, all of them talk about forgiving. And they talk about it also in the realm of why it is an act of self-care to let things go. We're going to take a look at that and take a look at the research. Now, I got involved in the topic of forgiveness, not just so much because of my being coming from a clinical background as a marriage therapist, working in the world of relationships, but also because of my need to forgive and to let go of things from my childhood, particularly toward my dad and my stepmom. I needed to forgive. Interesting, I never had any resentments towards my mother or my stepfather. And that was interesting because in my own journey of life, you would have thought that I would have, but I didn't. Because I recognized that even though I wasn't raised around my stepmother, because I chose not to visit my biological mother, I chose not to visit her starting at age 11. My father manipulated me. I never had resentments toward her. I had no reason to. She was a good lady. She never badmouthed my dad in front of me. I mean, she did everything right based on what a little boy wouldn't want to hear or see. All right. I was just so bonded and meshed with my dad, I didn't know how to say no to him. And but those were my issues. And so forgiveness was something that I had to wrestle with in my own personal life. Growing up in a home where there was abuse, where we were shocked with a cow prod, I was always put down by my stepmother. And the word always, I'm really, I have no memories of her building me up. I do know everything that she said that put me down. I can't measure it. Why can't you be like everybody else, et cetera, et cetera. I had a lot of hurt and resentment towards her and towards my dad. And you don't know what you don't know. And so I had no idea that I did. But it was not until I was in graduate school going through group counseling as a part of our doctoral, our master's degree training. We had to go through a practicum, 1-year practicum. And it was in that practicum in a group setting, counseling setting, that I touched anger I had no idea I had sitting inside of my emotional brain. And that was the first time I got a realization, there's something in me. And that was the beginning of my transforming and healing. All right. So when it started, it took a while, that's for sure. But that's when I got a realization. When you get that self-awareness, right? Self-awareness is essential to letting things go. But when I got the self-awareness, that okay, all right, then I've got some things to work on within myself. And I did, and didn't handle things perfectly back in those days, but I did handle things, all right, to become the man I am today at 59 years of age, where my wife at least says, you know how you've always strived to be a healthy, mature adult? Mm-hmm. And she told me last October I was that guy, and particularly to her and the kids. So I teared up thinking, well, thank you, because I've always wanted to be that guy. I didn't want to be an immature child like I was when I first got married, right? Manipulative, selfish, all of that, pouting. It's not very becoming of an adult person. So forgiveness became a topic because it was something I had to wrestle with myself. I graduated in 1994 from my doctoral degree at the Southwestern Baptist Theological Seminary in Fort Worth, Texas. Moved to Virginia Beach, where I became a professor and was teaching marriage therapy there. Forgiveness is a topic you don't see a lot in the research literature back in the 80s and early 90s around forgiveness in the clinical world. Very little has been researched about it. Part of it was the APA, as I understood it, believed that forgiveness was a religious issue. Thus, it had no place in a clinical setting. But thankfully, to men like Dr. Bob Enright, Dr. Fred de Blasio. Bob Enright was from University of Wisconsin-Madison. Fred de Blasio, who set up the first annual conference on forgiveness in clinical practice. I actually got invited to come speak there and present there, which I was honored to do when I was a professor at Regent. Some research I was doing at the university on forgiveness. Men like that who started doing clinical research around the effects of forgiveness on oneself and relationships and in marriage. And guess what they found out? That forgiveness isn't just religious. That to forgive is a very, very healthy way of living one's life for oneself and for the possibility of a future relationship. Now, you heard me say a possibility of a future relationship, because when you forgive someone, that does not mean you'll have a relationship with them. We'll talk more about what forgiveness is and what it is not in just a minute, all right? But I want to give you a heads up. What they do show is that when you forgive, There are all types of spiritual, relational, which is emotional, and physical benefits. We're going to talk about those, all right, in here in a little bit. But before we do, let's talk about a definition of forgiveness. What is forgiveness? I mean, if we define this thing, how would you define it? In our work, Relate Well, and matter of fact, in our Relate Well curriculum, we actually have a whole chapter dedicated to what forgiveness is, what it is not, what are the physical effects of it, and then we teach you some skills to forgive, how to forgive, all right? And move your heart to forgiving another. Why? For your benefit, for your benefit. And so what ended up happening was, through all this research, I began to dive deeper into it. And it was in age 30 that I was able to forgive my stepmother. And in that forgiveness of my stepmother, I was able to embrace my biological mother, who I was raised by my dad and my stepmom to hate and not like. I finally embraced her as my mother. And so forgiveness released me from what was and set my heart up for what could be. So let's talk about what forgiveness is and what it is not. And we're going to talk about it first by defining it. So here you go. What is forgiveness? We define it this way in our Relate Well work. Forgiveness is a choice. It's not an emotion. It's not a feeling. It's a decision. It's a choice that a person makes to, listen, to give up. Give up what? To give up their rights. Forgiveness is a choice that a person makes to give up their rights. Rights for what, Dr. Rick? Here you go. Rights for vengeance, retribution, and negative thoughts towards an offender. So here's the whole definition. Forgiveness is a choice that a person makes to give up their rights for vengeance, retribution, and negative thoughts towards an offender. It's like whenever someone hurts you or harms you, using a principle from the Christian scriptures about you without sin cast the first stones. Here are these religious leaders, and they wanted to stone this woman caught in the act of adultery. And Jesus says to them, you without sin cast the first stone, but you who are without sin cast the first stone. Basically what he's saying is, guys, you think you're better than she is? Can you imagine if somebody actually threw a stone at her at that point? How arrogant would you be, right? The reality is, it's almost like forgiveness is giving up those stones that you have a right to throw. Did you get that? It's like when someone hurts you and wrongs you, it's almost like you have a right to stone them. Because see, for every offense, this is important, for every offense, there's a debt, and every debt's going to be paid. For every offense, there's a debt, and every debt will be paid. It just depends on who pays the debt, you see. And so forgiveness is basically, let's say somebody hurts me, wrongs me, and I get a stone and I get to throw them. The question is, am I eligible to throw the stone? I may have the right to throw the stone, but am I eligible? And here's what I've come to realize. For every stone that I can throw at people who've hurt me, there are people back there behind me who have a right to stone me for things I've done to them. Did you get that? For every right that I have to stone, for every stone that I have a right to throw at people in front of me, people who've hurt me, well, there's people back there who have a right to stone me, things I've done to them. You see, in our humanity, it's a level playing field when it comes to offenses and debts, because we're all human. We all hurt people, either intentionally or unintentionally. We still hurt people. And who am I to throw a stone when I have a right to be stoned? And so when you think about the definition, forgiveness is a choice that a person makes to give up their rights for vengeance, retribution, thoughts, negative thoughts towards an offender. It's coming to an acknowledgement that, you know what, though you've hurt me, who am I to throw a stone? Who am I to throw a stone? That old adage, who are you to judge? If you want to judge, you'll be judged. If you don't want to forgive, then you won't be forgiven. It's that kind of, the law of attraction. Anger seeks anger, resentment seeks resentment. All right. And so forgiveness then is when you kind of, here's, you got a stone in your hand, but you give up your rights. You just kind of said, I don't have a right to throw this. By the way, if I throw the stone at you, what does it say about me? It says I'm pretty arrogant. it says actually I'm pretty immature. You'll see why in a little bit. Because mature people forgive and let things go. Immature people want to hang on to it and just take their stones and they want to hold on to them. You know, kind of like Gollum. It's mine, precious, precious, precious. This is my resentment. This is my anger. And I want to hold on to it. It'll turn you into someone bitter and angry and mean, deceptive, manipulative over time. I'm not saying you're going to look like Gollum, of course, but you get the print. You get the idea. When we hang on to those stones, what we're really saying is, I have a right to hurt you, and you do because they offended you. Though you know you're not eligible to throw the stone, because if you were eligible to throw the stones, you'd have to be without sin, right? You'd have to be perfect. So I mean, I may have the right, but I'm really not eligible. Because I recognize that, I let it go. But why do I let the stones go? Why would I drop the stones in a sense? It's for yourself. You know, this is what's fascinating about the research by Dr. Enright, Fred de Blasio, Everett Worthington out of Virginia Commonwealth. Wonderful, wonderful guy, written a lot of books on forgiveness, a lot of research on forgiveness by Dr. Worthington. And here's what he's trying to say. The forgiveness, when you let those stones go, when you forgive, the clinical research shows that people who live a life of forgiving, compared to those who don't, are more happier. They're physically healthier. I'll get to the data on that in a little bit. It stops depression. It'll reduce anxiety. It creates the possibility for intimacy. We'll talk about why that is in a minute. Just a possibility, not necessarily a probability. It opens the door for a possibility of intimacy. That forgiveness has all kinds of psychological, emotional benefits. Why would you want to hang on to stuff that makes you more angry, resentful, and over time makes you it makes you depressed? You end up with depression. You end up with anxiety disorders. You end up medicating that with addictions of various sorts, all because you want to hang on to your stones or your right to throw, but you're not eligible. But if you give those stones up and forgive, you're actually doing yourself a favor emotionally and relationally. But here's what we also know from the medical journals of what resentment and bitterness does. And resentment and bitterness is really unforgiveness. What resentment and bitterness does to the physical body. If you want to hang on to those stones that you have a right to throw, that basically means I'm going to stay resentful and bitter, and I'm going to throw these stones at you as often as I can, as much as I can. And we throw those stones in many different ways. We throw them through yelling, screaming, judging, blaming, sarcasm, silence, manipulating, all right, withdrawing. We do it through stonewalling. We do it so many different ways. All of that is you're throwing those stones in unhealthy ways. We call it fighting with ill will and relate well. We have a list, a pretty comprehensive list in the manual of all kinds of fighting with ill will. It's that resentment, that hurt coming out. It's, in a sense, it's a throwing of a stone. But if you were to forgive, you're free physically. But if you hang on to it, here's what the medical journals show. The longer you hang on to those stones of resentment and bitterness, here's what happens. You increase heart disease, heart attacks, strokes, high blood pressure. You stress the muscular and skeletal system. All right. So you have a lot of aches and pains, but you also have headaches, migraines, tension. It affects the endocrine system. It decreases your immune system from working, so you get sick a lot more. That is all the stuff that the medical journals show that bitterness does to you physically. And yet, when you forgive, you're not in resentment, so your heart functions well, your brain functions well. You don't have emotional or psychological problems. Uh-uh. All because you decided, I don't want to do this to myself. I'm going to let this go and move on. Now, at this point, we need to talk about what forgiveness is not. Because this is very important that you know what it is not. All right. Number one, forgiveness is not forgetting. Lewis Smedes had a famous book called Forgive and Forget. And he said that that's what the publisher wanted. He didn't want that title. That's what the publisher wanted to sell it. But it's actually impossible to forgive and forget. Forgiveness does not take away memory. It doesn't give you a front or a bottom. You don't remember anything anymore. All right. It's impossible. Example, if someone was sexually abused, they could forgive their abuser, but they'll always remember that they were abused. You see, forgiveness doesn't take away memory. It is not forgetting. Number two, forgiveness is not necessarily reconciling either. Just because I forgive you does not mean we will have a relationship. Why? You may not want a relationship with me. See, forgiveness is really something I do for me. Forgiveness opens the doorway. Listen, it opens the doorway for the possibility of reconciliation. But in itself, it is not necessarily reconciliation. All right? Which gets to this third point. It is not allowing injustice to continue. It does not forgiveness does not mean you allow other people to hurt you. Number three, if someone keeps slapping you, you can forgive them, but there are these things called boundaries you need to have and say, no, you're not going to treat me this way. You're not going to talk to me that way. If you continue to do this, then I'm going to do that. You got to have boundaries. Forgiveness means I'm letting this go for me, but you're not going to treat me this way. Sometimes you see this in domestic violence cases where a woman will get beat and she'll forgive because he's so repentant and remorseful. And then he beats her again. She forgives because he's repentant and remorseful. Look, if he keeps it up, it means he doesn't care, all right? Set boundaries for yourself. Forgiveness does not mean that you let people perpetuate injustice towards you. Another one is forgiveness does not condone. Number four, it does not condone what the other person did. Just because I choose to forgive you doesn't condone what you did. It doesn't make what you did right. That's very important. Some people have this misunderstanding that somehow forgiveness means that if you did this, then somehow it makes what you did all right. It doesn't make what the person did right or all right. We'll talk about why you do it in a minute. Forgiveness does not mean it restores trust. Forgiveness does not necessarily restore trust. Trust takes time to be built back. One thing for sure, you don't start building back people who've not repented or remorseful for what they've done, people who've not sought forgiveness. You don't trust them. Why? You don't know that they understand the damage they cause and the hurt they've caused. All right. And true forgiveness cannot happen without an identification on the offender's part of the damage they caused the victim. Did you get that? Forgiveness cannot truly happen. All right. There is no true repentance, if you will. If that person has not really fully understood the damage, that's why it's not necessarily reconciliation. I can forgive you, but that doesn't mean we have a relationship. Why? Because you're not truly remorseful and you've not truly sought forgiveness. You see, just as much as I need to forgive, I need to seek forgiveness. But that seeking forgiveness is dependent upon true forgiveness. When I seek it, is dependent upon whether I fully understand and grasp the damage that I've caused the other person. And that forgiveness, when I understand what I really did and how it hurt you, that pain that I feel for what I did to you becomes the motivation to never do it again. And that's why that kind of forgiveness leads to no regret. Why? Because I'm going to do whatever it takes to make it right. Or the old adage is, true forgiveness demands nothing. It just does whatever it takes to fix whatever they've done. But forgiveness in itself doesn't restore trust. Just because I forgive you does not mean that I trust you. You have to earn trust back. And lastly, forgiveness does not remove the hurt and pain. Forgiveness is a choice. But let me tell you something. the effects of what they did could still play itself out for sometimes weeks, months, or even years. You see, but I do know this. Unforgiveness blocks you from healing from the effects of what they did. You forgive ultimately for what purpose? You forgive for you. You forgive because you value yourself enough to not have to live in the space of resentment and bitterness that just destroys your physical body over time. It destroys your soul over time. And all that negative energy just leaks out of you and affects other people. And people see you resentful and bitter and angry and complaining. And remember, negative energy draws negative energy, and positive energy is repelled by negative energy. You take a positive and negative on a battery, they don't want to be around each other. You forgive because you value yourself enough to say, you know what, I'm not living this way. I'm going to let it go. I'm going to let it go. Why? Because as long as I don't forgive, a couple of metaphors, I have an anchor to the past. Got it? I have an anchor to the past. Or I kind of like this one. It's like an emotional umbilical cord tied to that individual. And you will always be affected by them. You could be 200 miles away or 1,000 miles away from them. Get off the phone with them and you're angry and resentful. Don't live that way. If there are things in your life that you have not forgiven, forgive. Let it go. Move on. Move on. Don't let unforgiveness destroy you. Drop those stones. Get rid of them. And set yourself free. Free to live a life of flourishing. Free to live a life of abundance. Free to live a life of peace. Free to live a life of joy. Which is where we humans really do thrive. But if you want to live a life of anger and fear, resentment, bitterness, feel free. But all kinds of psychological problems start to show up when you do. Addictions, depression, anxiety disorders, long-term, you get cyclothymia, dysthymia, all kinds of things. All because you want to stay angry and resentful. And I believe if you want to stay angry and resentful, feel free to do that. But you understand, the basis says you don't value yourself. It actually says that I don't respect myself. I don't value myself. I don't care about myself. But people who love themselves enough and care about themselves enough, let it go and move on forward. You know, religions have talked about forgiveness. Those in the Christian faith understand forgiveness was a picture of Jesus on the cross. But anyone can forgive, be it of the faith community or not. There are people in the faith community who don't forgive and people not in the faith community who do forgive. And I believe we are no more like God than when we forgive. We are no more like him than when we forgive. What do you need to forgive today? What do you need to be free from? Who are you holding stones towards? Let's go back to our definition. Forgiveness is a choice that a person makes to give up their rights. The rights are in the stones that we hang on to for vengeance, retribution, and negative thoughts towards an offender. But when you give up those stones, let's say a stone weighs about 4 pounds. When you give up those stones, boy, the freedom you feel. Your heart is free. Your soul is free. And clinical research proves it too. I find that fascinating. So here's my admonition today to you. There's someone that you have not forgiven. Ask yourself this question. What is it that I want from them? Get it? What is it that I want from them? The reason people hang on to their stones is because they still want something from their offender. Maybe you want them to suffer. Maybe you want them to admit they are wrong. Maybe you want them to grovel. I don't know. But you have to ask yourself, why am I hanging on to these things? It's typically because we want something from them. What is it that you want from that person? And then ask yourself this question: once you identify what that is, will you ever really get it? Most of the time, the answer is no. What you tend to find out is you're the one losing sleep, not them. You're the one that's being that's destroying yourself. They ain't thinking about you. They can care less about you. But you're the one, day in, day out, week after week, month after year after year, struggling, hanging on to that stuff, resentful. They're not, because they don't care. What is it you want from them? And once you identify that, ask yourself this question: will you be willing to give up what you want? Would you be willing to give it up? Give up the expectation that they're going to admit they're wrong. Give up the expectation that they're going to say they're really sorry with genuineness. Will you give that up? And then put those stones down, because then you realize all I'm hurting is me. And you are. Let it go. Set your soul free. Set your soul free. And you care enough about yourself to let it go. See, relate well. We believe strongly. We live by 4 principles. We call them the 4 protectors of us: goodwill, respect, humility, and empathy. We live by those 4 words: goodwill, respect, humility, and empathy. And those 4 things shape us, become healthy, mature individuals. And then you're going to ask yourself this question: well, then, is unforgiveness in my heart? Is it goodwill? No, it's not in goodwill towards me. Does that negative energy come out in disrespectful ways? Yes. Get rid of it. It's not even respectful for you to hang on to it. And it shows you don't care about the other person, but really shows you don't care about you. But unforgiveness is still rooted in pride. And yet, freedom comes when we walk in humility. Let it go. Set your heart free. And when you do, you'll live that life of abundance. The very thing you've been looking for. Let those things go and move on. You may not have a relationship with that person, but that's all right. In the end, they didn't want wrong to you. Remember, it's not necessarily reconciling. But one thing for sure, you go find the people who do care about you and you hang around them. Quit worrying about the ones that don't want to be around you. And yes, I'm here to take it. I've learned it myself. It may be friends, so-called friends, and family members. And that's what's called life. This is Dr. Rick. If we can encourage you on your journey, let us know at relatewell.us. That's relatewell.us. Blessings and have a great day.